Hi, my name is Courtney Swall, and I'm here at Austin Peay State University studio today with a few of my colleagues from Mass Communications. Today we are going to be going back into the history into the 1960s and the 1970s to go over some of the movies during that time period. Some of the things that we're going to emphasize today include the history, the directors, and the genres that were popular during that time period. All right, here is my colleague Aaliyah Cottle, and she will be talking about the directors.
Okay, Courtney, I wanted to start off with a question for you.
All right, go ahead.
So, when you first go to see a movie, what's the first thing that you think about?
Normally when I go to see a movie, the first thing I think of is the actors, like who is going to be the lead role in this movie.
See, that's usually how people think, but the directors of the movies are usually the person behind everything. And without them, there wouldn't be a movie. Okay, well, just to jump into this, there was a lot of influential movies back then that changed the game altogether. So I'm going to start off with a movie called To Kill a Mockingbird. And that was based off of a book. Robert Mulligan, he directed it in 1962, and that was just, it touched on a lot of subjects that were touchy and harsh, and it pretty much shed a light to a lot of segregation and a lot of bad things that happened back then. Another one would be Bonnie and Clyde. In 1967, Arthur Penn directed that, and as again, it was like a couple, they were rebels, starting chaos and everything, so that changed the game as well. To shed light on the sci-fi aspect to it, in 1967, a guy named Stanley Kubrick, he directed 2001: A Space Odyssey, and that was just a sci-fi feel to it. In 1961, a movie called West Side Story was directed by Jerome Robbins, and that was one of those musical, two sides, the west side and the east side, they battling it out, and it changed the game. It was one of those musical things. Great. Jumping ahead to the 1970s, Grease came out, and that was really an influential one. I feel like even me today, I love that movie. It was directed by Randall Kleiser in 1978. And like I said, to this day, I watch that movie. Steven Spielberg in 1975, he did Jaws. Everyone still watches Jaws. That's a really good movie even then. Sidney Lumet in 1978, she directed the movie Wiz, which is a really influential black culture with Michael Jackson, and it was a beautiful movie if you've ever seen it. In 1973, Cleopatra Jones was made by Jack Stewart, and that was also a really influential black movie as well. But like I said earlier, there wouldn't be a movie without directors. It's hard to write a movie, but it's also hard to put it in an aspect where people are watching it and they can understand it and everything. So directors should be as important as actors.
All right, now here I'm with Bailey West, and he will be giving you an overview of the sci-fi movies during the 1960s and 70s.
Well, I want to just kind of stress on some of the great directors that she talked about, such as George Lucas, who is one of the most amazing directors of all time, with Star Wars and all those different movies that he made. And I just kind of want to stress on those factors and talk about some of the sci-fi works and the beginning of the thriller genre. I'm going to start off by talking about 2001: A Space Odyssey. It was a film made in the 60s. I believe it was like 68, I believe. And it basically was following the journeys of a few men traveling in space with their companion HAL, HAL, which was an AI, and it was actually considered one of the very first thriller movies. And it was very exciting. I don't know if you've gotten to see it ever, but it's a very interesting movie, and I think that everybody should probably get the opportunity to just pick it up and watch it just because of the historical content. And it's crazy. They think of it as 2001 was supposed to be this big year, and it ended up being obviously 2001 is 14 years ago. It's not that same what they had thought it was going to be. So it's kind of interesting seeing what the 60s thought 2001 would be like. I'm going to move on now, and I'm going to start talking about Star Wars, the movie that we all know and love, a very good household name. Everybody knows that the director, George Lucas, did an amazing job, made 6 movies, and they're coming out with another 3, I think. So it's interesting watching the first one, especially since it came out in this time period, starting out this new trend, and all this generation that got to see this, and then finally got to see all 6 of these movies being made. It's just a very interesting movie, and seeing what they did with the budget they had and the technology they had is very interesting. less common movie people may not have seen was Planet of the Apes. Uh, Planet of the Apes is just an altogether classic. It's so good that they went and not really remade them, but went on and made a sequel to them twice. 2 different times they went and made different sequels. The first one, I believe it starred Matt Damon, which was really bad. That one it didn't work out very well. And the second one starring James Franco, that one was very good. But Planet of the Apes was just a very good movie, very sci-fi. Obviously, if you've seen the movie, they go back or forward in time just to find this new planet, and they ended up, landing on Earth, and it was crazy, and they're like thousands of years in the future. But that's pretty much wraps up the sci-fi genre pretty much for the 60s and 70s, However, there were a lot more movies, but I just kind of wanted to brush on some of the top movies there.
Up next, we have Maya Brown, and she will be talking about the African American films in the 1960s and 70s.
In the 60s and 70s, the movie industry was competing with the television, so they wanted to get their viewers back, so they decided to make movies about like vulgar things like sex and drugs and stuff like that. And so the African American community had a response. They wanted their movies to be geared towards their community, and so it was actually called Black exploitation. Like the movies I'm talking about, they were like stepping stones, or they were like really monumental in that. It kind of went hand in hand with the civil rights movements that was going on right there. So it was all about putting African Americans on the charts, on the map, to say like, hey, we're important too. I'm going to talk about 2 movies today that were very influential, and the first one I'm going to talk about is Cleopatra Jones. Now, I don't know if you know about it, but Cleopatra Jones was the epitome of a black woman back in that time, because she was intelligent, she was sexy, she was very feminine, but she was strong. Cleopatra Jones was a person that black women at that time could identify with. Cleopatra Jones is about, first it stars Tamara Dobson, and she plays Cleopatra Jones, or Cleo in the movie, and she's an undercover special agent for the U.S. government, and she thwarts the plan of Mommy, which is an evil drug lord who is also a female too. And Mommy seeks revenge for that and attacks her home, Cleo's home. And so Cleo spends the rest of the movie trying to hunt down her enemy, and she's kicking butt left and right with her martial arts abilities, and while trying to save and help her community. Cleopatra Jones was very influential in the way that it replaces the traditional white man hero and replaces it with a powerful and assertive black heroine. Also, the movie also highlights the industry's progress towards gender equality, and she's shown as being on the same level of her male counterparts. So The Wiz, it was really, oh my God, it's my favorite movie, but The Wiz wasn't doing so well, even though it had like Michael Jackson, Diana Ross, it had like Nipsey Russell and everything in that, but it was basically, it's the urban version of The Wizard of Oz.
Can you help us, sir?
What's in it for me?
We'd be very grateful.
Yuck, 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 yuck.
There it is.
Mama would be so proud. Going to see The Wiz. end up the one with the silver slippers.
And so it was a remake, but it wasn't received well by the crowd. But now it's a part of the African American culture.
All right, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the evening.
Actually, go ahead and talk.
Okay. During the early to the mid 1960s, movies took a literary. Okay, what is it? Okay, Hollywood looked to literary works for inspiration. There we go. That's all I have to say.
Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead.
During the early to the mid 1960s, the movies went to literary works for their inspiration for the movies of the 1960s. That doesn't sound good.
Want to try it again?
Yes, I definitely do.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Cut it and then do it again.
Maybe he could just say they based the movies off of some books or something.
All
I
right.
feel like that's
Yeah, because that sounds stupid.
literary, you know what I'm saying?
Okay, so movies were based. Okay, so basically say from the 1960s, movies were based or inspired by books. There we go. That's what I'm going to say. And then I'm going to say some of the examples are To Kill a Mockingbird and what is it? The Raven. The Raven's one of them. Okay. All right, let's do that. Yep. During the 1960s, movies were inspired by literary works during the time. And some of the examples, some of them that were really popular and that were based off of were To Kill a Mockingbird and The Raven, as well as The Pit and the Pendulum.
Now you can go on and talk about the other ones.
Okay.
Is it still, camera still hot?
Okay.
Go ahead and pop it back on.
In the 1970s, the subjects that the movies normally portrayed included crime, drugs, sex, and all of the things that pertained to every age group, basically.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good.
No, sounds bad.
No, okay.
Oh yeah. No. They also emphasized on social issues during that time period as well.
Yep, okay, that works.
Okay.
Go ahead and
And
next
then for the third one, Hollywood cannot always predict how the films would go, and so directors were most of the time emphasized on Hollywood whether cannot it went always good or predict bad, how the depending on films their would directing go,
style.
and so directors were most of the time emphasized on whether it went good or bad, depending on their directing style. Yeah. Okay. Now. Okay, but do you want me to do the
And then we
ending
go to
again
the
now that I have a
ending.
little bit more time?
That's all we have time.
That way I can
Okay.
like recap on
All right.
everything.
Is that good?
So we've
Yeah,
okay,
let's
now
try it.
okay, but this is
Hold on, let me
recording
go
right
ahead
now
and
again,
let me go
now
ahead
that
and
I have
end
a little
this
bit more
and
time. That way
do
I can,
another
like,
one
recap
for the
on
ending.
everything. So we've
Yeah,
heard
sure,
from,
let's try
okay.
it. Mic is hot.
This is
Hold on, let me
recording.
go
All
ahead.
right.
Let me go ahead
So
and
we've heard from. Oh wait, just kidding.
for the ending.
All right, so we've heard from Aaliyah, and she's described to us a lot of the different directors during the 1960s and 70s. And we've also heard from Bailey, and he gave us a very good overview of the sci-fi movies that were very popular during that time period. And we've also heard from Maya, and Maya gave us a very explicit overview of the African American movies during the 60s and the 70s. And I also gave you a brief history of the time period of the 1960s and the 70s for movies. And